thank you so much to everyone that is joining us here this evening. I know that we've got 8 at least different groups of organizations that are supportive of veterans in our communities, and perhaps we may be strangers in the sense that we don't know each other personally, but I just want to suggest that when it comes to the values and commitments to service and protecting this nation's veterans, we are all very good friends, even though we may not have met yet. So thank you very much for coming today. Today is a little bit of a bittersweet opportunity and point in time. There's going to be an update later on this evening that's going to talk about some legislation that was voted on today, and unfortunately things did not go in a way that we wanted to. And we're going to share those details earlier, but I point that out because you may think that the scheduling of today's event was a little bit of a gift of God to coincide with this vote today. But that actually would be a little bit less than true, because the reality is this effort to privatize VA healthcare, this effort to dismantle government services, period, is not something that's going to happen on one day with one vote. It's going to be a continuing stampede that is going to keep on evolving. And I assure you that many of the forces that may call themselves supportive of the troops, may call themselves supportive of veterans, and may even be driving around with that stated commitment that usually is exemplified by a Chinese yellow ribbon magnet on the back of the car, is not going to rest until they have profitized veterans' health care. So I ask that you all keep that in mind. This is not a sprint, it's very much a marathon. And I want to thank in particular some superheroes in my world that I want to point out. Would all the executive board members for Local 2157 please stand, if you wouldn't mind? Marsha Blaine, Tiffany Blum, David Blum, Gary Wagner. Really appreciate their efforts. This is the AFG Local that represents the staff that works at the Veterans Healthcare Administration, both at the medical center as well as the regional office downtown. And with that said, I want to introduce the superhero of today, someone that I've known for many, many years. And she's done an outstanding job of putting this event together and bringing together a wide variety of coalitions. And this whole idea of being in a church, I think, really brings it home for all of us. Betsy Zucker.
Well, thank you all for being here. And this event was started, it's hosted by AFGE, that's my union, our Local 2157. We have support from our district and from national. But we have a lot of organizations here, and I really just want to give a shout out to all the organizations that support us. Our labor partners, Oregon AFL-CIO, the Labor Council, our community groups, Healthcare for All Oregon, Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, KVU Community Radio, and really a big shout out to the Economic Justice Action Group of First Unitarian Church, which is the reason that we are here. Also, our veteran partners. We are co-sponsored by the Veterans Healthcare Action Campaign, and also the real rock stars are Veterans for Peace. Nationally and Chapter 72 here in Portland, and Veterans for Peace have taken on this struggle to save the VA from privatization as a main force of what they're doing, and it means everything. I'm a union member. I'm also a retired VA employee. I worked for 15 years as a nurse practitioner at the Portland VA, something I'm very proud of. And I see people here who have been employees at the VA also, and I wonder if they could just stand, raise your hand. I'd really like to acknowledge some real wonderful co-workers, former co-workers, current co-workers. So thank you very much. And I get the honor of introducing Suzanne Gordon, who I just met today. Suzanne's an incredible healthcare journalist. She has expertise in healthcare systems, in nursing, in patient safety, and she has spent the last several years researching and writing about, becoming an expert about the VA. And she is one of our strongest supporters in the country. So thank you, Suzanne, for being here.
I want to thank you so much for having me here today. I want to thank Betsy. I want to thank your local. I want to thank all the people who sponsored the event. I want to thank the Congress people's staff who are here and who have come out to educate themselves, particularly Congresswoman Bonamici, is it? Who voted against the dreadful
Mission.
what? Your
Congresswoman Bonamici today joined Congressman Blumenauer in taking a very courageous stand and standing with the VA, the caregivers, and veterans by voting against the privatization.
please.
And just because Suzanne brought it up, I know we have representatives also here from Congressman Blumenauer's office and Representative Wyden's office. If anybody else is here, you should introduce yourself. All right, thank you.
Can I ask how many veterans are in the audience? Oh, wow. Well, I'm asking because the union has graciously offered to give everyone who is a veteran, and you don't have to give us your DD-214 to prove it, or any of your medical information, a free book, Battle for Veterans Healthcare. So please come up later and I will sign it for you. So thank you so much. And if you already bought one, you can get another one and give it to somebody else. I have 15 minutes, so I'm not going to go through the thank yous to all the wonderful people because I just want to talk to you about why I'm here, who I am, and why I think this is such an important issue. I am not a veteran. None of my children are veterans. Nobody in my family's a veteran. My daughter is a nurse practitioner. Had the honor of working for the VA in West Haven, Connecticut for a year and now works for Bernie Sanders. Woo! But she's not a veteran. I have no stake in this, you know. Nobody's paying me. I wish they were. You know, people often say, "Are you being paid for by the VA?" And I say, "The check has been in the mail for the past 10 years." You know, I am doing this because I'm a healthcare journalist and researcher who's been covering private sector healthcare for 35 years or more. I'm a patient in the private sector system, and I have actually, thanks to my wonderful husband who worked for the Communications Workers Union for many years, I have what's called Cadillac coverage. And I have to tell you, I will never get the kind of care that veterans get at the VA when it's at its best. I will never experience that. Because we, out there in the private sector, have disintegrated, fragmented, episodic disease treatment. We don't have a healthcare system in this country. We don't have a mental health system in this country. We have 7,600, get that, 7,600 geriatricians in America to serve an aging population. We have a shortage of something like 40,000 primary care providers. We have we have 1 of every 7 healthcare dollars goes to, for us in the private sector, over treatment, unnecessary treatment, because You know, if you have a hammer and you get paid by the hit, then everybody looks like the most lucrative nail. The VA, I've spent the past 5 years writing a new book called Wounds of War, How the VA Delivers Health, Healing, and Hope to the Nation's Veterans. And I describe a system that in Congress right now, they are setting the stage to dismantle if we do not pay attention. And if we do not commit ourselves in this room, as so many people have done, to protecting a system that we as Americans have invested in for the past 70 years. We've made an investment, a social investment, a financial investment, an ethical investment in creating a healthcare system for veterans. Now, that healthcare system has problems. Every single person in this room who's seen the VA, who's been to the VA, knows that there are problems, right? How could you not have problems in the largest healthcare system in the country and one of the largest in the world? Yes, there will be facilities like Roseburg that have problems. There will be facilities like Phoenix that have problems. But did anybody ever tell you, everybody knows about Phoenix, right? Phoenix, where the wait time scandal. Did anybody ever tell you this little important detail? That every year in Phoenix, 25,000 snowbirds descend on Phoenix for 4 months. How do you staff a healthcare system where 25,000 patients come into it for 4 months? You're an administrator, you're a nurse, you're a doctor. Valdez, could you come over for 4 months and, by the way, figure it out after the 4 months is over? I mean, that was like a little tiny detail that Jeff Miller, when he was the head of House Veterans Affairs Committee, kind of neglected to mention. You know, when Miller, who's they're suggesting to be the new Secretary of the House Veterans Affairs, Miller complained because you veterans, like in Portland, the VA was spending $5.4 million on art for 6 years. God forbid they should put art in their hospitals so that you could heal better as veterans. What he neglected to mention was that $5.4 million, it was over 10 years, the budget of the VA for those 10 years was $750 billion. There are so many zeros after the decimal point in that I couldn't even do it on my computer what that represented of the budget. You have people now who will take any itsy-bitsy thing or big thing that the VA does wrong and blow it up and suggest that the private sector can do it better. Because what is happening now, as we speak now, in Congress, is a successful, sadly, attempt by the billionaire Koch brothers, who hate government and want to destroy anything in government that works. Hedge fund tycoons like Steve Cohen, who was narrowly avoided going to prison for the largest insider trading scheme in U.S. history, who set up an alternative mental health system to the VA. And you have hospitals circling like vultures, not because they want to take care of your PTSD or your MST or your Agent Orange or your rehab or your homelessness or your legal problems like the Veterans Justice Justice Outreach Program does. What they want is the money for your hip replacement and your MRI, right? And, your episodic treatment, right? They can't take care of us to manage chronic problems. They don't want yours, because guess what? Yours are worse. The average, I'm 72, the average Medicare recipient has 3 to 5 presenting problems. The average Vietnam vet has 9 to 12, right? And the veterans in this room and the veterans who the VA takes care of are poorer, sicker, older, sicker, right, than any other patient in America. The average veteran has more pain problems, more mental health problems, more problems for suicide risk, more substance abuse problems, on and on and on, than any patient, most patients out there, particularly the kind of middle income patients that the insurers and the hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic and so forth love to cherry pick. And right now, what's happening in this bill in Congress is that under the name of giving veterans more choice, right? And in America, who could be against choice, right? They are trying to give you the same kind of choice we have on television, right? Which is kind of 500 of the same channels, right? Or the kind of choice we have when we fly, right? 500, I don't know, 4 or however many of the same kind of uncomfortable seats in an airplane. They don't want to give you real choice because they're eliminating the VA as a choice. What they're doing in this bill, and this is part of the privatization effort. So I want to just step back because we're talking about VA privatization. Now, everyone in Congress says they're against privatization. The people who just voted for this bill say they're against privatization. And it's absolutely critical for us to understand what privatization is and isn't. When they say they're against privatization, what they mean is they're against tomorrow we sell off the Portland VA, we fire, and every other VA in the country, we fire all the staff, we auction off the medical equipment and the beds and blah, 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 blah. And they say, well, we're not for that, right? Actually, the ultimate aim is that, but they know that veterans, veterans view that as poison. They don't want privatization. But what privatization really is a spectrum. That is at the extreme end of the spectrum. It's kind of like school choice. Nobody says we're going to abolish all the public schools and give people vouchers to go to private schools. What they do is what they're doing now. They starve the VA of resources. Yeah. Bernie Sanders, in 2014, met with the VA, met with the VSOs, and they said to him, we need $21 billion, 2014, to make the VA work. The Republicans killed him. You can go online and listen to Jeff Sessions saying, our veterans wouldn't want us to use all this money. Really? Really? You wouldn't? And they killed that bill. Then Phoenix came, and then Sanders and McCain made this compromise. It got the VA $16 billion, of which 10 went to outsourcing care. The VA needed $21 billion, and it got actually 5 for clinical care because they used another $1 billion for other things. So that meant the VA was like $19 billion behind in 2014, right? And it has not caught up. So when the president says we're adding more money, they're not adding enough. The VA has 36,000, depending on whose figures you use, vacancies. If there are waits, I wonder why. I started writing about the VA in 2014. There were 34,000 vacancies. Now there's 36. And nothing in these bills in Congress or anything Congress is doing is addressing filling those vacancies. In fact, what you're going to see if this bill passes the Senate, is that those vacancies will increase because they are shifting people from clinical positions taking care of you to acting as care managers, navigators to navigate you out of the VA and into the private sector. This in spite of the fact that we know that the private sector is not ready to take care of the complex problems you as veterans have, right? Your PTSD, your MST, your traumatic brain injury, your pain problems, right? Which actually increases the risk of suicide, right? Your Agent Orange related problems, your burn pit related problems, your 1,000,000,000,000,000,000 exposure related problems. In fact, What is really scary about this bill, which is going to channel more veterans into the private sector, going to make it easier for you to go to walk-in care. Now look at walk-in care, walk-in clinics. What's wrong with going to walk-in clinics if you're a veteran? I mean, I can do it, right? Well, the problem with walk-in clinics is that it fragments care. And it kind of like, it's the walk-inization of healthcare, the CVSization of healthcare. Who is staffing these walk-in clinics? Are we overseeing the quality of care in these walk-in clinics? And increasingly, hospitals are hooking up with pharmacies to set up networks in which you are a prisoner of the walk-in clinic and the hospital, because out there in the private sector, unlike what the right wing says, we do not have a choice of where we go. Where we go is dictated by what kind of insurance we have, right? And where our docs and so forth have admitting privilege. Nobody in this country, unless they're a super gazillionaire, has total choice of wherever they want to go, right? That just doesn't exist. Pardon?
Traditional Medicare.
Traditional Medicare, too, yes. But also, your choice is determined by whether you can get an appointment, right? And one of the questions that Congress isn't asking, Congress is assuming that there's excess capacity out there in the private sector to handle veterans, like, 9 million more veterans. The average wait time in the VA is like 2 days for an appointment, and I think it's 5 days for a specialty appointment. The average wait time in the private sector for a family practice doc is 24 days, 105 in Boston. There's not like, you can't just call up the best cardiologist in town and get in tomorrow, right? Because there's only 775,000 doctors in America, and there's 330 million people, right? So there are limits. But what this is doing, okay, so we're going to have walk-in clinics. In Phoenix, when CVS was negotiating their contract with the VA for walk-in clinics, you know what they wanted the VA to pay per appointment? The average, their fee for regular people is $85. You know how much they wanted to charge the VA? $450. Right, and they went to Shulkin, and Shulkin intervened and said, no, now Shulkin isn't there anymore, right? A veteran in Phoenix, another Phoenix story, got angry at the VA. He needed a stem cell transplant, and he didn't want to go. The VA very wisely has centers for transplants all over the country, and if you need a stem cell transplant, you go to Seattle. The VA pays your airfare, pays for your family to stay in a hotel, pays for you to stay, and the cost is $150,000 per patient. He got the VA to let him get a stem cell transplant in Phoenix. Guess how much it cost?
$450,000.
What?
$450,000.
$1 million. 10 times as much. Now, this legislation will open the floodgates for that. You have 9 million patients getting some stem cell transplants, some heart transplants, some liver transplants, 10 times as much. That's going to mean that they're going to have to cut eligibility, cut services, increase co-pays. The American public will not tolerate spending 4 times as much as it does now to take care of veterans, even though they should. So you'll see all kinds of cuts. In the bill, there is a provision to set up an Asset and Infrastructure Realignment Commission, a BRAC commission, a VA Closing Facility Commission. That commission will be created and appointed by this president, who says he wants 90% of veterans to be cared for in the private sector, whose vision of health care is you run to the doctor and get it fixed, right? How many doctors in the room? I wish I could run to you and I have a lot that I could, and I could just walk. I wouldn't even have to run. I wish, wave a magic wand and it's fixed. That's a sophisticated vision of healthcare, right? And this commission would close VA facilities. There's a pilot program to look at the wisdom of TRICAREizing healthcare, VA care, which would mean that that the VA would become an insurer, not a provider. And you know, there are a lot of people in this room who are fighting for Medicare for all. Having watched the VA, what we need is VA care for all. Medicare is a payer. It's not a system. It's a payer. And what the VA is a system. So the VA integrates primary and mental health care. The VA delivers palliative care, home care, geriatric care, etc. I am not a veteran. And I have one of these on my car, you know, so I have two of these on my car, and this one on my computer. And I believe, after watching and observing VA care, that the VA provides a model of care for all of us. The National Academies of Science, Technology, and Medicine just did a study of VA mental health care for Iraq veterans and said if it was properly staffed and providers weren't burnt out, etc., that VA mental health system could be a model for a broken healthcare mental health system in our nation. VA research benefits not only you in this room, but all of us. Thank you, VA, for my shingles vaccine. If I needed an implantable cardiac pacemaker, thank you, VA, for that. I don't smoke anymore, but if I needed a nicotine patch, I would have the VA to thank for that. The VA teaches 70% of our physicians in training, 40% of our nurses, 40% of psychologists. Nobody in Congress is thinking about what's going to happen to the medical education system if privatization and the dismantling of the VA occurs. And that's going to happen because this bill combines the funding for community care and VA clinical care. So every dollar that goes to the VA that goes out into the community is taken out of the VA budget. I mean, you don't have to be a math whiz, which I am definitely not, to figure out what's going to happen when costly private sector care depletes the budget of the VA. And there's a provision in the bill that says if providers will not accept Medicare payments, that they will provide more money for them as an incentive to take care of more complicated veterans. And that's going to happen not only in rural areas, but in urban areas. And I can tell you that it's not going to be a pretty picture when people like myself are told that we can't get an appointment with our primary care doctor because the veteran comes first because they pay more. And that's already happening to Medicare patients in terms of private sector insurance. So I really encourage you, Ian's going to talk more about this, but we have these bumper stickers. They're not to put, you know, inside your book as a bookmark. We need these to be on everybody's cars who works at the VA, who goes to the VA for care. These are conversation starters, folks, because right now a lot of people believe that the VA is broken beyond repair because that is what the media and the Kochs want you to believe. And yes, there are problems and we need to fix those problems. But the issue for a healthcare system is not whether it has problems, it's what it does about them, right? And so I believe we all need to work together. You need, as VA employees, you need to speak up. You need to not be silenced by fear and by people telling you that you can't talk because of the Hatch Act, because you can, and Ian will tell you more about that. We need to save a VA. It is our VA. It doesn't only belong to veterans. It is a national jewel and we need to protect it, and I hope you all will continue doing that.
you so much. So we're going to bring up some panelists and have a brief panel discussion until about 7 o'clock, and then we're going to have time for questions. So hopefully you've got some good questions for our panel. Do we have our panelists? Betsy reminded me that we have a very close partner here in Portland that really helped make this happen. Portland Jobs with Justice. If you could... And if we could just do some quick introductions. Dan, we'll start here and go back to Suzanne.
You're introducing us?
You're introducing yourselves.
Okay, my name is Dan Shea. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I'm on the National Board of Veterans for Peace.
My name is Marsha Blaine. I'm a Vietnam Air veteran, combat medic, and I'm also a VA employee, IV nurse on the IV team, as well as the union president.
My name is Kimberly Bump. I am the Professional Vice President for AFGE Local 2157, and I'm very happy to be here. I would also say I'm a licensed clinical social worker at the VA as well.
All right, so we're going to move very quickly so we can get to questions.
Oh, last one?
I'm Suzanne Gordon. I'm a journalist and have written about VA healthcare. Thank you, sir.
And just so you know, you probably figured this out, we are filming this event, and I will add that one of the things we're really hoping to do at these forums and afterwards for a few minutes is those veterans that use the VA, care about the VA, and VA caregivers stay afterwards and say a few things on camera, if they're willing, about their experience and what the VA means to them. And I think that's a perfect segue to my first question, which is directed at our veterans on the panel, to Marsha and Dan, and that is, as a veteran, please talk about your experience at the VA and what the VA means to you in 90 seconds, if you can. Sorry.
You go first.
Well, I have accessed the VA health care. I've had 2 ambulance trips up to the hill, and I got laughed at by the ambulance crew saying, "Why do you want to go to the VA?" I said, "Because I work there, I know the work they do, and I don't want to pay triple the cost for every test and every exam that I get charged in the local hospitals that I have been to." I know the care that they give because I work there. I am an insider. I know that they give quality care. Our homeless population depends upon our VA, and we cannot disappoint them.
Okay, again, my name is Dan Shea. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm an Agent Orange exposed survivor. My son was born with congenital heart disease, cleft palate, other abnormalities, and had to go for surgery in 1981. There's something that went bad in surgery, and he passed away. I am having to live with post-traumatic stress. The issue of the war is a constant nightmare and daydream that invades my life continuously. But I didn't go to the VA till probably 2008. So I had, regular health care. I was a union person, and my wife had good health care. Together we had pretty good care, but it cost us a lot of money. It cost us out of our wages. It cost us when we went to the doctors and copay. And then finally, I lost my job. I went to another job, and my health care was very poor. And somebody said, "Hey, you need to go to the VA, the Veterans Hospital, and get care." And mainly because my post-traumatic stress was really flaring up as these continuous wars continue to happen. And then in about 2008, I applied for eligibility. Took a year to get it, but once I got it, they have taken care of my diabetes, my post-traumatic stress. I have annual checkups actually every 6 months my doctor does labs, checks my blood, and I'll be going for therapy this Friday, as my doctor ordered MRI just about a week ago, and we found out that I have like 5 discs that are out in my lower back. And these are injuries that happened to me over a number of years. So the VA has been there, and it costs me nothing. I love my VA. We need to stop the privatization. This is also union busting, and I'm a union person, so we need to stand up for our staff people and workers. Thank you.
Marcia, I just wanted to follow up with you about a little bit more the difference between private care for veterans and VA care for veterans, either on your own experience or what you've seen over the years, and if there are any examples that you want to bring out or concerns you have.
Well, the great part about the VA is they don't kick you out the door within so many days for whatever medical condition you've got. If you've got pneumonia, the DRGs that the private hospitals utilize, you're out in so many days, whether you're well or not. And I like the fact that the homeless people, the people that have 5 or 6 medical conditions, we're not kicking them out the door as fast as they come in. Of course, we have to manage our bed space, but there's times when we can keep them longer. And that's the beauty of this care, is the private sector and Providence and Legacy, they kick you out within so many days as fast as they can. And it doesn't happen at the VA to a rapid point like it does everywhere else. Also, putting an IV and drawing blood on our patients, I'm able to take my time. I understand what they go through as a veteran, and when I feel that they want me to back off, I back off. I come back and I approach them again. And I take the time to explain what I'm doing and the reasons behind the care that I'm delivering. And I don't feel that that's what happens in these other medical facilities. It's they want to get you in as fast as they can and out the door. Rapid delivery and not personal care.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I'm going to open this up to the entire panel. The next question, which I think ties in well, is describe the philosophical and operating differences between the VA and private sector.
Before I answer your question, I just want to say I'm really humbled to be in the presence of so many veterans, and so I just really want to say thank you. I know Marcia and Dan and Dylan, a number of you in the audience. From a philosophical standpoint for care, I can tell you from a clinical side of things, I have been so privileged to be at the bedside of a number of veterans who, from their walking in and sharing time with me, they were able to express for the very first time their experience in war and their experience in theater, in their service. And for many of them, they had never shared their experiences with their family members, not even their spouse. And those moments have been so rich and so precious. And I know for a fact that those kinds of moments would never have been achieved in a community hospital. Because first, going into that room, my entire education in terms of being a clinician has been at VA. I was there as a student, and then I became a worker there, and I understand what veterans need, how they behave, even when you walk into an elevator. I've had multiple veterans take 2 poles and swing a pole out to hold the elevator open. And, call me ma'am. I've actually had 14 marriage proposals. I've kept track. It's a, sorry, 15. My husband's in the audience. Sorry, honey. It's an environment where the men and women there who have served are so unique and so precious. And from a community standpoint, when you're taking care of patients, you have a wide range of patients that you're caring for. You know, if I were to cross the bridge and go to OHSU, you know, in a day's time as a social worker, I could be caring for somebody very young or family dealing with somebody fairly young to an older audience. It would just depend on where I'm at. And the unique part about VA is that I know every single time I walk in the door, I'm going to be working with a veteran. And I'm going to be working with a veteran's spouse or family who have also served in a particular manner. And that to me is just so important, and we have to preserve that.
I think that it's really important what you said, Kimberly, because if we start dispersing veterans into the private sector, you'll have a physician who has maybe 3,500 patients, 2,100 patients, and maybe they'll have 50 veterans or 100 veterans. We've discovered from the studies that community providers, most of them tell us, that they know nothing about veterans' problems. What's even scarier is that they say that they're not interested in learning. This bill that is passing Congress has no requirement that requires community providers to take the kind of courses, continuing medical education credits, that VA providers have to take good care of you. So, and in the studies, they showed, I can't remember if I mentioned this, they showed that 50% of the providers who say, in the private sector, who say that they want to take care of veterans, none of them want to learn those problems, right? But you know what? It doesn't make any financial sense for them to take time to, to learn the problems of 50 of what might be 50 or 100 patients. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. So the VA is a community of care, right? And the private sector is fragmented care.
Thank you. You can imagine how difficult it is to keep a timeline with this kind of panel and expertise. The follow-up question I think has been answered, but I want to ask everybody on the panel briefly, is the private sector ready to take on the veteran population?
Absolutely not. There's no way. They absolutely have no ability to take on extra care. As it is for care to specialties, you're waiting months and months as it is, and sometimes even to get in primary care providers, you're waiting months. So for an area like Portland and Vancouver that's already saturated, it would be a mess to then put veterans out into that community, yeah. I mean, rural areas would be a little bit different, but no.
And I'd love to hear from the veterans on the panel about the possibility of private sector taking on veteran population.
Well, I've been in the private sector, and there's the myth that the VA, you can't get an appointment, take forever. One thing is I would sit in the waiting room while the people were stacked up for hours before I could see my doctor. If I had to go to a specialist, I had to then get permission from the insurance company, who would override my doctor, and they're not a doctor, but then they would diagnose and say, no, you can't have that kind of treatment. Then we'd have to argue, and if I had to go anyhow, then I'd have to fight to get them to pay for it. And sometimes I couldn't. I would end up paying for it. The one thing I noticed as a veteran, for years I never talked about being a veteran because I couldn't talk to civilians about it. I can only talk veteran to veteran about issues that affected me. And so when I was dealing with post-traumatic stress, it was very hard to talk to a doctor who didn't understand it, who wasn't a veteran. And it took going to the VA and through vet centers and to people that were veterans to talk about what was really bothering me. And it's so important that we have that kind of treatment for our veterans. I spend days that people don't realize. I may seem calm and easy for people think I'm very, very calm about these issues. But there are days that I go home and I'm in the dark and on my couch and depressed for days after days before I could get up. And that's because every day I'm hearing something about somebody else being killed in a war. And people don't understand that. And I feel guilty from what happened when I was in Vietnam. I feel guilty that we killed 4 million Vietnamese. I feel guilty that there are still children dying from Agent Orange, both in this country and in Vietnam. So, no, I don't think they're prepared. I don't think they understand us veterans.
I have to tell you my experience on the 9D of the Portland VA and taking care of transplant patients. It is such a joy to see the kidney kick on and the urine start to flow and the person has such a glow and they're renewed with life. And we have a wonderful transplant hospital. We have very few failures and we have people flying in from other states to get the care. And I cannot imagine having that hospital close with livers that aren't going to get transplanted. Veterans that need a liver and need a kidney aren't going to get it. You're not going to get it on our at Legacy or Providence because they won't have the funds, they won't have the insurance coverage, and we can do it better.
Yeah.
As many of you know, last summer, Congress passed and the President signed into law a piece of legislation called the VA Accountability Act. I wanted to hear from the panel, and again, we're going to keep it very brief because we're going to try to move on to questions by 7 o'clock, but I wanted to hear from the panel, A, what is the VA accountability, and B, how has it impacted VA employees and thereby the veterans that you serve?
So the VA Accountability Act was signed into law on June 23rd of 2017. And I believe the intent of the law was to enable VA to terminate or demote employees with greater ease. I think the law got a lot of bipartisan support based on the idea that it would allow management to also terminate SES employees, the senior executive staff, and that they would be able to, demote and terminate management staff with greater ease based on a couple of issues that some senior executive staffers had at the Veterans Benefits Administration with sort of egregious spending and egregious acts. So since it has come into fruition, what we have seen quite regularly is the frontline staff being affected by this. And actually, sort of more noticeably and more disturbing is the veteran population of our staff being affected in the housekeeping positions and other positions that are typically kept by veterans. They are being terminated at an awful rate. And so I'm very concerned about that and how that's impacting our veteran population of employees. And I'm concerned that the law is really not being utilized the way that I believe it was intended, which is to look at egregious behaviors by management and utilize the law to be able to terminate those employees. I can tell you that from our local, we have pointed out to our director, and keep in mind we represent all three VBA, VHA, and NCA administrations. We've provided information to all three administrations about management staff that have really some significant problems, violations of law, violations of not just our contractual agreement, but they're violations that should result in termination, and they definitely have not. And it's for us disturbing because a standard bargaining unit employee would absolutely be fired for these actions, whereas management staff are not.
Marcia, Suzanne, Dan, on the VA Accountability Act.
Well, I wouldn't call it the VA Accountability Act. I'd say fire a VA employee is what the law really is, making it easy within 15 days from the time that management decides to issue a adverse action or a removal. On several instances, a couple of the employees had an on-the-job injury and they were really getting eliminated because they hurt themselves on the job. And there was issues that was a training, no training whatsoever in the person they were trying to remove. So there's no real evidence. They have one incident and they're up for removal. And I really don't think that's justice, that's fair. If the employee is truly not doing their job, they should be, definitely disciplined and potentially removed if they can't perform. But to just arbitrarily remove VA employees within 15 days, I think is morally wrong.
So I'm going to be tough here because I'm going to reframe the question for Suzanne, and then I'm going to give her about 60 seconds to answer. Suzanne, how do you see the accountability fitting into this bigger discussion of privatization?
Right. Well, one of the hallmarks of privatization is that you bash the staff of the public sector institution and suggest that it can be done better in the private. And I just want to say that I've been hearing not only from frontline clerical or housekeeping staff, but I got a call from someone who, I'm not going to use his name, who's very high up in VA mental health leadership, who called me out of the blue saying, I've been here for 30 years and I've never seen anything like it. VISN directors and VA central office directors are telling people, you can be fired on the spot. And, I think it's very important for us to remember that this is a healthcare system. And when you tell employees that they can be fired if they do something that management or somebody doesn't like, that can kill people. Because if a nurse feels she can't tell a doctor he's not giving the right med or the right dose, and she's afraid that she's going to be fired because he's going to call her insubordinate. If a housekeeper feels that, she can be fired because she says something to an RN, or, in the rollout of this new bill, VA leadership, there's a lot of implementation and regulatory things that are going to go on, and it's extremely important for people to have the freedom to say that doesn't make sense to start that program in mental health or whatever. People are going to die because of this act. And we're going to see, Jasper Craven did a piece in The Nation that you should all read, and that maybe Ian has a copy of. But there's a wonderful quote from a veteran who was on, compensated work therapy, who, he wasn't, productive enough because he had PTSD and was a bit of a mess. And if that guy loses his job, he's going to be homeless and he'll probably kill himself. And then guess what? They'll blame the VA because there's more, veteran suicide. It's just a perfect setup.
And now with your moderator losing his job due to his timekeeping abilities, the final question, and I'd like for each of you to answer this if you're willing, but the solutions we keep hearing from Congress, in the media, and the Koch brothers, whose AstroTurf group is called the Concerned Vest of America, is always send more care to the private sector where there is not accountability. And I just wanted to hear maybe a couple of things from each of you that you think, specific solutions that you think would solve the problems other than privatization. Because as you said, there are issues that need to be addressed within the VA.
Well, first of all, I think one of the solutions would be actually to fully fund the VA. Veterans for Peace has taken this up as a national campaign. So we have chapters all across the country that are working on Save the VA. There are events happening. Almost every day I get an email from Arizona, one of the guys that started up, Buzz Davis, who started up the working group with Veterans for Peace. And he keeps everybody in line. Actually, he gave us the banner that's up here for free. Right? Those up. He got grants for that. And so we try to stand out every once in a while in front of the VA to let them know that I think people need to know what is going on. I don't think Bob was talking to you earlier, Bob Perjansky, our Secretary-Treasurer of Veterans for Peace, FE2, and he was saying, I don't think people in the VA actually know. Those are people that are using the services know what's going on. We need to let people know so that they can fight, because that fight means solidarity, and we all need to come together to make that happen. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest pitch I could give would be to staff the VA. And as an IV nurse, and I work 4 floors, sometimes it was just me there. And I had to do my best to respond quickly to a stat IV placement or a stat lab or assist on wherever I had to go. And I had to apologize continually to providers and to the nurses saying, I'm so sorry, but we only have me on duty to handle 118 patients. So I guess the best thing I can, as a frontline worker and a veteran, is to say, staff the VA, please.
Well, those are probably the best answers to give. I would say, in addition to that, get rid of what's now called supportable org charts, which basically have redefined what is needed in each department based on funding that is currently available. And of course, that has to do with staffing and allowing each different location have funding that would fully support the number of patients that are seen there. And then also, without veterans, none of us would have jobs at the VA. And I think that we've sort of lost our way in terms of how we're providing care to veterans and what the mission and the goal is of VA. And we need to just get refocused back on that. And you know, there's an initiative now called Whole Health. And whole health to me means that we look at the veteran as a whole person and we look at how we can care for that veteran with every possible resource that we have. And that doesn't mean skimping. I mean, the veterans aren't for sale. They're not on sale. You know, we can't get them for 70% off or 30% off. They're 100%. You know, they're a full veteran. So we've got to treat them that way. And we've got to fund VA as though they're 100%.
Thank you. I echo what everybody said. I think one of the biggest things we need is a change in leadership in VA central office. When Ken Kaiser in 1994 became Undersecretary for Health, he brought in a completely new management philosophy that was about supporting staff, not blaming staff. The Trump administration has created a website where you can see every person that's been fired, but there's no website that talks about the good things that veterans do. VA central office actually prevents your hospital here from talking to the media about the good things VA do because they don't want, VA does because they don't want them to know about them. I was, this morning, I was speaking at the OHSU Nursing School, and someone in VA leadership in the hospital told VA staff that they couldn't attend my meeting because I was going to talk about privatization, and it's because I wrote a book that's pro-VA. David Shulkin wrote a book called, edited a book called Best Care Everywhere. David Shulkin, Undersecretary for Health and then Secretary for Health, with 400 pages of excellent things the VA does. And that book has been suppressed by the Trump administration. If you go to the government printing office website, it is back-ordered. It has been back-ordered since it came out. When I called VA central office to ask them for a copy, the VA communications person didn't know that, oh, Shulkin wrote a book. Did you say the name was Best Care Ever? So, you know, VA has to be able to compete, that has to be able to offer market rate salaries, but it also has to be allowed to tell you veterans and the public that what the studies show, which is that they deliver care, that it is uniformly equal or superior to that given in the private sector.
I'd like to just say one thing about the Best Care Everywhere. So I believe it was 2 years ago, we gave that book to all of our nurses for the Nurses Week. Best Care Anywhere, yeah, sorry.
No, this is a different book.
No. Oh, yeah, I think, no, we gave that book.
No.
Shulkin's.
No, Shulkin's book came out
Oh, you're
in
right.
June. You gave Phil Longman's book.
Yes, I think you are, yes.
And, okay.
For those looking for the books, what are the two titles we're talking about?
Okay, Best Care Anywhere was written by Philip Longman. Best Care Everywhere, Shulkin wrote, David Shulkin edited a book. He took the title from Philip Longman, right? And he dedicated the book to Philip Longman. And Philip Longman didn't know the book existed until I told him about it. He said, I've always wanted a book dedicated to me. It's too bad I never got a copy.
And with that, let's give it up for our panel. And I'm going to introduce my colleague. I'm going to make a confession. I'm actually from California, and I've just been honored to cover Oregon for the last few months. But I'm a legislative and political organizer with AFGE, with the union. And Grant Schott is my colleague, and he is now taking over. He's locally based. He's going to be covering the Northwest. He's here in Portland, and I want you all to meet Grant, and for Grant to meet all of you. I know you'll be working closely together, and he's going to give us a couple updates, and then I hope you've got some questions ready for our panel.
Okay. I've learned so much from the panel. I've worked for AFG since 2011 as an organizer, and I've worked at VA, but I've learned a lot from all of you tonight, so thank you. And thanks again for the congressional staff coming. Marie Armitage from Senator Wyden's office had to leave, but Dan Marr from Senator Merkley's office is with us. And again, I want to thank Dylan, and I hope I'm pronouncing these names right, Dylan Bergstad from Congressman Blumenauer's office.
Thank you, Jim.
And Alicia Hagerty from Representative Bonamici's office. And one of the constituents here from McMinnville, a national representative, Tim DeBolt. So, and also, I know that he's been introduced, the Bonneville Power Administration AFG local president, Marvin Thomas, is back there. And they're in the same building as, let's see, Senator Wyden and Congressman Blumenauer, right? So you can lobby for us too. And it's interesting, BPA is one that the Northwest delegation has been united against privatization for decades because everyone knows about BPA. So we just need to make sure more people know about VA and why it serves the same purpose BPA does. It serves everyone really, indirectly. So several things you can do to help us. Most of you have probably already signed this petition. We actually have two, one to the Oregon delegation, one to the Washington one. Is there anyone here who hasn't signed it yet? Okay. We'll pass it around or it will be on that table there. So I hope you'll sign that before you leave. Also, we have extra copies that folks can take if you would like to, go, of course, you can't do it on federal property if you're a federal employee. Well, actually, if it's legislatively based, you can, right, on break time. Okay. But if others want to take some, we have about 30 copies. You can get them back to us or to our Kimberly and her husband Dave are the legislative political coordinators for the locals. So I'm sure they would like to have more to take on their lobbying visits. One other someone I see, Valdez Bravo, who's with the Democratic Party of Oregon, and he works for VA as well.
Yep. Can I mention the bill I passed today?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so really briefly, and the way we're going to do questions is we're going to have this half of the room line up on this side, this half over here. I mentioned earlier, and Grant just acknowledged the legislative staff here, we had a really important vote today, and on all of your chairs, you should have received a flyer that looks like this. You might be asking yourself, well, how did the House of Representatives vote on a Senate bill today? It is a very convoluted process, but they did actually vote on this bill called the VA Mission Act, and we lost. That bill passed 347 to 70, I believe. So those are somewhat similar to the Accountability Act numbers last year. I wanted to acknowledge, and I hope everyone heard me earlier, when you speak to the staffs and when you speak to your representatives, Bonamici and Blumenauer, they deserve a big, big thank you for standing up to the Koch brothers, the right wing of the Republican Party, for voting against that. All eyes are now on the Senate, and I'm so happy that we have staff here from both Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden's office. These calls need to be made. Please take a couple extra flyers, contact us, come up to me or Grant afterwards. We need to get these out quickly. Our concern is that they are trying to pass this by, what big holiday do we have coming up? Memorial Day. they're trying to get this done very quickly. So please, please, get these out, make the calls. Anybody can make this call. When you, yes?
So it says here, my name is blah, 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 and I work at the VA. So what about people like some of us in this crowd that don't work at the VA and we're not veterans?
Great question. I'm going to ask you to make a little edit. Take out a pen, cross it out. But what do you say? If you're a veteran, you say you're a veteran. If you're with an organization, say you're with that organization. Obviously, say you're a constituent. They might even ask you what your zip code is to double check to make sure you're not like me and coming in from California and calling Congressman Blumenauer. Yes, go ahead.
Can you talk about the VA Mission app?
Yeah, so it was discussed a little bit earlier. Very briefly, what this does is it does two big things. What the VA Mission Act does is expand access to clinics with no accountability, and I'm talking about private clinics. CVS, Walgreens, clinics like that. With no provisions that say after you go to a clinic, you have to come back into the VA care because this is an integrated special care, as you heard about from our panel. It does that, and then also, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, it sets up a BRAC-style commission. We had this with the Department of Defense. Essentially, this is a commission with folks appointed by the President and others to look into how to shrink, modernize the VA. So it does a number of things that we feel are a big step to that. And on the flyer, you'll see a couple 4 bullet points on that, and you'll also see 7 points that we said, hey, we want to work with you, members of Congress. Let's fix these problems. 7 things we proposed, all of them knocked out. So please, please make these calls, help get this information out, and also if you want, they're very small cards. They look just like that. If you could hold it up again, Grant. On the side, and if you want to get text updates straight to your phone, you won't get many, you may get a couple a month. You'll get updates that way directly to your cell phone. But with that, I want everyone to start. If you've got a question, please line up either here or on this side for our panel.
Can I say one thing?
And
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
They change the bill numbers all the time, and I believe some of these I handed out might have something other than S2372 on it. But if so write down S2372, but if you call the number, they update it with whatever the current bill number is, and it might change in a week.
That's a really good catch. So if everyone could take out their, because this event's also about taking action and beating back this effort. So please take out your flyer. The bill number that you're going to be calling Senators Wyden and Merkley about is Senate Bill 2372. Senate Bill 2372. And if you don't want to deal with numbers, don't worry about it. It's the VA Mission Act. Vote no on the VA Mission Act.
And there's we have a fact sheet about the act, and if you want a more detailed analysis, if you write this website down, www.vhac.org.
ffvhc.org.
Right, www.ffvhc.org, and it'll say legislative analysis, go here. And there's a very detailed but still comprehensible legislative analysis on the Veterans Healthcare Action Campaign website.
And in case you were wondering, please start coming up with your questions. The BRAC stands for Base Realignment and Closure. These are essentially privatization commissions. In case you're wondering about the acronym.
We do have extra leaflets up there with the correct bill number if you would like another
The
read.
purpose of which is to shut down VA campuses.
The purpose of which is to shut down VA campuses, correct. And what I'm going to do, just to make sure everyone gets their questions in, is we may bundle questions. So I'm going to ask the panel to take notes, and we might bundle 3 or 4 questions at a time, just to make sure we get out of here by midnight.
Want me to go first? All right. My name is Thomas Etienne. I was Army from 2006 to 2015. And just in the audience now, looking up on the VA website, there's a press release called Debunking the VA Privatization Myth, sitting on va.gov. And at the bottom of it, it has a little quote from Chairman Phil Rowe in the House, Chairman of the Veterans Affairs. It says, if we're trying to privatize, we're not doing a very good job. We've gone from 250,000 employees in VA to 370,000, and we've gone from a $93 billion budget to what the president's asked, $198 billion. It sounds like we've been an utter failure if we're trying to privatize. How would you like to respond to Chairman Rowe?
That's a great question. We're going to bundle these questions, though, to make sure
Okay.
everyone gets their... Suzanne, we're going to bundle them,
Oh, we're
because
bundling?
otherwise we're not going to get everybody in.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we are going to answer everyone's questions, but we're going to bundle a few questions at a time.
My name is Chris Lowe. I'm with Portland Jobs and Justice and Healthcare for All Oregon. Suzanne, you talked about the myth of privatization, and when I think about sort of the bait and switch that I hear going on here, it rests on this idea that the private sector is always more efficient than the public sector. So what I'd like to do is ask you if you can talk about what's the relationship between cost efficiency and health effectiveness, because you've said this is a system of care, a health effective system. What does that do to cost, and what does it do to cost if we take that away?
Thank you.
My name's Jim Ruler. I want to thank the panelists and the organizers here. This reaffirms my pride in being a physician at the VA for the past 42 years. And being a federal employee. Over the last 15 years, I and my colleagues have seen hundreds of veterans turning to the VA for care when they had never sought VA care before because of the pharmacy drug benefit. As we know, the VA, as opposed to Medicare, is allowed to negotiate steep discounts for pharmaceuticals, and many veterans who are in the private sector have no coverage or little coverage for pharmacy benefits. They've come to the VA where they get their medications with little or no co-pays. What is the understanding of the panel of what is going to happen with the pharmacy drug benefits for veterans if this privatization initiative is carried to the extreme?
Thank you so much. And so we'll do those three questions, but I'm going to ask everyone to keep their answers really short. We had a question about the debunking VA privatization, which was put publicly on the VA website in those terms. The second question was about the myth of privatization and cost efficiency, and then a question about the pharmacy drug benefit.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for asking that question. I can try, and then my colleagues can add to this. That press release was a direct result of the fact that when David Shulkin was fired by Trump with a tweet, that he wrote an article in the New York Times, an op-ed, saying that he was fired because he wasn't privatizing enough. So they sent out this pretty phony press release, and basically have actually tried to shut down. They've sent dictums to VA leadership around the country saying, do not talk about privatization if anybody asks you about it. And as I said this morning, people weren't allowed to come to my talk because it was about anti-privatization. So how come if the VA secretary is saying they're not, interim secretary is saying they're not privatizing, you can't come to a discussion of not privatizing if you're not privatizing? These are all phony. The fact that they've added more to the budget just papers over the fact that they haven't added enough, and that we've had all these wars, and that's why we've added more money and more staff. We haven't added enough money and staff. And I'd like to point out that Wilkie followed this press release with another press release, which you can find on the VA website, where he was talking about a problem a veteran had in Phoenix, or somewhere, I can't remember, no, Salt Lake City, about a dirty bathroom, and he said the reason why we need to pass the Choice Act is so this veteran can go out to the private sector. That's the way you solve the problem in Phoenix.
So the other questions were about the myth of privatization and cost efficiency, private versus public, and also about the pharmacy drug benefit.
Anybody else want to? Cost effectiveness. The United States healthcare system is first in the world, absolutely. We are number one in how much we pay for care, for treatment, and how little we get for it. We are 37th in infant mortality. We are 37th in the OECD industrialized countries on a whole lot of measures. The VA is very cost effective. The VA takes care of sicker, poorer, older veterans who are sicker for way less than the private sector. An estimate done for the Commission on Care suggested that if 60% of veterans were taken care of in the private sector, it would cost $450 billion. It currently costs $80 billion for 9 million veterans. And I'll just take a crack at pharmacy benefits. That's why Big Pharma is for privatizing the VA, because they don't want negotiated prices.
And I'll add to the pharmacy piece. It's our understanding from talking with AFGE folks at the National that if privatization does move forward, the idea is going to be doing some kind of either like a voucher idea, or there will be a certain dollar amount per veteran for care, and then things will have to be paid out with that dollar amount. So whether it goes to pharmacy dollar amount, or it's going to be a specific amount, and that's going to be what their care needs to come out of. So I feel like it's not going to be a good situation for them.
Yeah, I just wanted to add also on the idea of bait and switch and the pharmacy benefits. One thing, they're very good at language and about trying to talk about, choice. Well, it's not about choice. It's the same thing as right to life. They switch the language around. But real choice is our choice to support the VA healthcare system that works for us. That's my choice, and that's what I want people to know. Also, as a diabetic, I have to take pills daily to control my blood sugar level. I could not afford that in the private sector. Everything is covered. My pills will come to me by mail. I don't even have to go up to the VA to get them, and it's continuously taken care of. So what they've done is they actually, and this is the whole idea of insurance, and is a single payer, is that you have a large group that can negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to drop those prices down. But we need real change in our medical facilities. I would like to see the VA, not just to say that the private sector is bad. There's some good private sector doctors and people who care, but that we have a single payer system side by side with the VA center, VA healthcare. Together, we can cure and take care of the people, all of the time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Tom Ward. I worked for 42 years as well as a physician at the VA and still a professor at OHSU, professor emeritus. My question is about how do we educate the media to be smarter and fairer in the reporting about the VA system. I mean, I see headlines, wrong kidney transplanted, large MRSA outbreak in ICU, and on and on and on. These are headlines from the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, and they're not from the VA system. But anything that happens in one VA system gets propagated as a damning sentence on all of the VA system, which is a government system as well. Anti-government sentiment comes into this. Much of what we're dealing right now with privatization is because the media doesn't know about this, doesn't report about it, and what they are reporting is that the VA system is broken because they can't do a 30-day waiting time or less, a time that the private sector could never do. So how do we turn the media around to be on the right side?
Thank you.
I'm Barbara. I'm from Northwest Women's Veteran Coalition Connection. I would like to ask about the invisible war, and that is military sexual trauma. just recently are the women actually getting this acknowledged, much less helped. And what happens when we do away with the VA? I also work with the Family Justice Centers that specialize in domestic violence and sexual assault, and they are absolutely not prepared to handle military sexual trauma. They don't understand the culture. They don't even know the questions to ask. They are not schooled in this. What's going to happen to these women?
My name is Bob Prochansky. I'm a veteran and a member of Veterans for Peace. The good doctor asked most of my questions, but I just wanted to ask this, since this is a country in which we saw today that 2/3 of the Democrats in the House seem to buy into this dominant narrative, which is the only one that's out there, which is that the VA is a loser, is, wait in line, blah, 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 blah. Another government bureaucracy, it's like the Motor Vehicle Bureau and all that bullshit. The only way to fight that, it seems to me, and the only way to defeat these privatization efforts is to develop a huge groundswell. That's what made the Bush administration give up on trying to privatize Social Security. Without that kind of thing, and this is a country in which half the people are either veterans, have veterans in the family, have friends, relatives who are veterans, work with veterans. People are sympathetic to that if they know anything about it. In the last year, I haven't heard a single thing on the news, radio or television, about the VA, except that you have to wait in line forever and pontificating about how our veterans deserve better. My question is this, finally getting to it, sorry. Why haven't the unions put commercials on television? What about the AFL-CIO? Well, every union in the country has an interest in this. Veterans are union members. It's if they get away with this privatization, it feeds, it makes them think they're going to get their way in everything. And this, I would think that of all the things in this country in terms of social services, one thing that people mouth all the time is, nobody says veterans without the word heroes in the same sentence. I personally don't feel that way. But people are pretty much united that veterans deserve stuff. And it's just, we're talking about health care and not big fat pensions and stuff. It really, this is the kind of thing that ought to get some results for some attempt to get into the media. Because without that, it doesn't exist in this country.
So we're going to end the forum with these three questions, but before I do, I really want to thank all of you for coming. I think if you look at the group of co-sponsors, you see that what is going to lead to this groundswell is going to be a coalition, like is happening in Chicago right now with a Right to Heal campaign to stop VA privatization, healthcare advocates, single-payer advocates, veterans organizations, certainly unions coming together, and again, always with the veterans at the forefront, as Kimberly said, talking about what veteran healthcare means. I think we can beat this thing. I'm hoping that's what this event has helped jumpstart here in Portland. But with that, I do want to end with answers from our panel on these three questions. The first was about educating the media. And another plug, once this is over very soon, for those that would like to say a few things on camera about their thoughts on the VA, certainly their experience with the VA, either as a caregiver or as a veteran receiving care, please take, again, 90 seconds to come over and share that experience, because these stories, as was mentioned, are not getting out, and with reason, as we see the focus of the media and their funders. So, educating the media, military sexual trauma, the invisible war, and how the private sector would or wouldn't be able to handle that issue? And lastly, building this groundswell, and where the hell is the AFL-CIO? Okay.
Thank you. So I want to first start with Tom's question, and you know, I think it's so important that the audience realize that a lot of what the unions do is work with Congress, and part of what we do also is work with media. However, having said that, there is a huge stigmatism that VA employees have with regard to being in front of media. I have been in front of media on a number of occasions with regard to rallies and different things, but it's so concerning when you have to be careful about if you answer where you work, then you're going to be, at risk of possibly being terminated for talking, and if the media says, and because the media has done this on multiple occasions, they will say, so where do you work? And I'll say, well, I'm with AFGE Local 2157, and they will say, well, so do you work at the VA hospital? And I have to be really careful in trying to say, well, I do represent, healthcare employees, but I cannot identify. So we're very cautious about that. And it makes it is crazy making. And how do we get that message out? And then to talk a little bit about, I'm going to skip down to Bob's question first, Veterans for Peace. I wanted to say to Bob that the union AFGE has spent actually hundreds of thousands of dollars on commercials, and we have targeted those commercials. Oftentimes they're played in DC to try to hit most of our congressional constituents and our Senate, or not constituents, but our representatives there, so that they can see the commercials and that they will see that the veterans that we're representing have issues, and they also have very positive experiences with VA. So those commercials are played. They all are also played in other locations, and we've seen them in Portland. Yeah, and they're on social media, and it's votevets.org. Yeah, thank you. Votevets.org is where you can see those commercials, and so AFG has put a lot of money into those. And then going to Barbara's question with regard to MST, absolutely, the private sector is not prepared to manage veterans who have MST. I think that the VA over the course of the last couple of years has really sort of come into its own in terms of caring for veterans with MST. I mean, we are developing, we are actually in groundbreaking development right now in our care for MST veterans. And we have done some excellent work over the past couple of years, and that work will be completely diminished if VA is privatized, especially right now, because it is at a critical time for that work. And we are just now really gaining the trust of veterans with MST. We are gaining more and more trust with our veterans, and more people are seeing what we can do for veterans with MST, and they're now feeling like they can share their story. So we would hate to see that go away. It would be a travesty. And no, the community's not prepared for that. They are not prepared, and nor will a one-day class or a one-week class for community providers. That will not teach them enough to be able to provide for our veterans.
Other panelists on those three questions?
As far as military sexual trauma, just imagine that under a president who's a misogynist and a sexual abuser himself, for them to do a goddamn thing about it. That's the way I feel about it. The other is that, you want the media to take notice. We have congressional representatives here. They have voices that can speak out and gain media attention. I think we need your voices, our senators and our representatives, our congressmen, congresspeople, to speak out and talk about these issues. That will get us some. The other is, as Bob said, we need a groundswell movement of people in the streets talking about this, holding our banners up, going to various events that we can gain solidarity. We can do that. We need more and more people involved. That's how we get attention.
I have to say that I happen to be an aging veteran, and I need my health care. So don't take it away from me. I deserve it. I earned it. I served. As all those veterans that are coming off the battlefield now, that are going to need care, why would we abandon them now? And I believe that if we take a stand politically, my local is going to march every year in the Veterans Parade with our banners now. We are going to rev it up. We're going to yell it out in the streets in Northeast Portland where we marched this last Veterans Day, and we are going to spend our holiday speaking for Save VA Healthcare.
I think that those were all extraordinary questions and your responses were great. I think veterans need to go to the local newspapers and television stations and say, why do you never write good things about the VA? We have constant advances in treating PTSD, MST, burn pit exposures, on and on and on. We have incredible sleep studies going on at the VA in Portland, up there on the hill. We have all these things and you're not covering them, and you should be covering them. You should be writing to Washington and saying what to VA central office in Washington is putting the kibosh on local VAs, not allowing the media to find out about good things. People should be writing to them, right? And if you want to start a movement, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, you know, the elephant in this room here is the VSOs, the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. 38 veterans organizations have pushed for this bill that is going to privatize the VA. And I think anybody here who's a member of any of those organizations, and if you're not joined, right, and write to them and say, why have you supported a privatization bill? There's a lot, we could talk about that for hours. They have good intentions, but they're doing the wrong thing. And that you have put pressure on the Democrats, and that's why the Democrats are voting for this bill. And they should be taken to task about this. There's a lot we can do. And we do. We need a movement to do it. And this is the beginning of this movement, right? Well, it's not the beginning. It's, you know, Veterans for Peace and all these other groups. You've been doing great things. I don't want that stack I don't want to go home with that stack. You got to take this and start conversations. I was at a grocery store, and it was actually a tile store, and a gentleman put some tiles into my car, saw my bumper sticker, and said, "Oh, are you a veteran?" And I said, "No, I work with veterans." And he said, "I'm a Vietnam vet." And I, told him what we were doing. Oh my God, they're going to privatize the VA. I had no idea. I brought him a copy of my book. I brought him a letter to send his congressman, and he did. That's how it begins.
And I want to add one thing. All right. One thing, I would like to see a T-shirt that says "Save the VA," and everybody can wear wherever we go. But if you want to have answers to a lot of the questions that were raised, read Suzanne's book.
Yeah.